The hangar smelled of coolant and something older, grease, ionized air, the faint copper tang of blood that no scrub brush ever fully erased. Sergeant Lena Voss stood at the edge of the maintenance bay and looked at Unit Soma 422R for the first time. She had expected a machine. She saw was a woman sitting on a crate, knees drawn up, chin resting on folded hands, watching the rain streak down the hangar's cracked viewport, with an expression Lena had only ever seen on homesick soldiers. "You're looking at her like she bites," said Dr. Arun Kausuk without turning around. He was elbow-deep in a secondary chassis frame bolted to the opposite wall. Spare parts, Lena assumed, until she realized the frame was shaped like a spine. He had the careful hands of someone who had spent his life making things that were not supposed to exist. She doesn't. Bite, I mean. Pressure sensors in the jaw assembly are calibrated for comfort, not force. "That wasn't what I was thinking," Lena said. "It's always what people are thinking." Soma 422R turned from the rain. Eyes were dark. Slightly too still the way all synthetic irises were if you knew to look, but warm in the way that made you forget to look. She tilted her head, a gesture so unconsciously human that Lena felt the small hairs on her arms lift. "Sergeant," Soma said. Her voice was low, unhurried. "You're the one they're sending me out with. If they actually send you out. Here to assess." "I know." A pause that was almost a smile. "I've been assessed 12 times, Doctor." Arun made a sound that might have been a laugh. 13 now, he said. 13 times in 4 months. He pulled a neural filament free from the spine frame and held it up to the light, examining it with the focused tenderness of a man checking a child's pulse. Every time a new commander needs convincing. Every time she convinces them. He let the filament coil back, and yet somehow they keep sending someone new. Lena crossed the hangar floor. Close. Soma 422R was even harder to read as a machine. The micro-expressions were too textured. Not the dozen stock expressions of early-generation synthetics, but the layered half-signals of a face that had learned to feel things by watching humans feel them. There was a small scar line along the jaw, synthetic skin that had healed imperfectly after some earlier damage, and Dr. Arun had not repaired it. Lena said she respected that. "What do they call you?" Lena asked. "On your own terms." Soma. "Not Samsri?" Something synthetic face, not quite a wince. "A memory, maybe, compressed and surfaced." "Dr. Arun's daughter's name," Soma said. "He built me when she didn't come home from the second cascade. He called me that in the early months." A pause. "I outgrew it." Arunson said nothing. He was looking at the spine frame again. "What is that?" Lena asked, nodding toward the frame. Soma's gaze followed hers. "He's calling her Samporn. She's not finished. She won't be finished for a long time." The almost smile again, softer this time. "He says I need a sister. Do you?" "I don't know what I need," Soma said. "That's the honest answer. I know what I can do. Tell me," Sosmatol told her. The Veth had been on Cressa Station for 11 days when Lena's unit arrived, and in that time they had reduced 4 of the stations to pressurized rubble and were working methodically through the 5th. They moved in triads, 2 flankers, 1 breacher, and they were very good at being methodical. The Veth were always good at being methodical. It was the thing humans had consistently underestimated about them. Not the size of the ships, not the energy of the weapons, but the patience. They did not rush. They did not hate. They simply arrived and began removing what was in their way with the same steady focus a river applied to stone. What made Cressa Station strategically non-negotiable was the relay network it anchored, a string of deep comm nodes that reached 6 inhabited systems, and 1 militarily critical way station near the Peleron Gap. Let Cressa fall and the string went dark. The string go dark, and Command lost situational awareness over half the outer theater. So, Command had sent 32 soldiers, 2 combat engineers, and 1 android who had been assessed 13 times. They docked at Ring 2 under a Veth patrol window, which meant they had approximately 47 minutes before the next sensor sweep. 47 minutes to move 3 clicks of station corridor, establish a forward position at the Ring 4 junction, and do it without alerting either of the 2 Veth factions currently working the inner rings. That was the other thing Command had not fully briefed them on until they were already in transit. 2 factions. The Veth hegemony primary advance. 14 triad units, methodical, disciplined, and the Veth separatist forward element that had been embedded in rings 5 and 6 for 3 days before the primary advance arrived. Two factions were technically allied. In practice, the separatists regarded the primary advance as interlopers on territory they had already claimed, and the primary advance regarded the separatists as irregular elements who complicated the geometry of their methodical work. They were not shooting at each other. Not yet. The corridor junks between Ring 4 and Ring 5 had become a kind of tense no-man's land, each faction positioning without engaging, both watching the other. Two rivals, Lena said, looking at the tactical display in Ring 2's abandoned ops room, each holding their half of the house. "And we're going to walk between them," said Corporal Desh from the corner. He had the particular tone of a man stating a thing he hoped would be disputed. Nobody disputed it. Soma stood at the display with her arms crossed, studying the junction geometry. She had been quiet since the dock, quietly watchful, the way she'd watched the rain back at the hangar. Lena had noticed that Soma went still when she was working through something. All the small social animations suspended, the face neutral, in a way it never was when she was present. She looked most like a machine when she was thinking hardest. Lena found that oddly reassuring. "They'll each have bioscanners at the junction access points," Soma said. "Standard Veth hegemony hardware uses a 4-layer authentication: thermal, acoustic, chemical, and a base neural signature check calibrated for Veth biology." She turned from the display. "It isn't calibrated for mine." "You've tested this," Lena said. "At the Peleron assessment 6 weeks ago. Hegemony standard scanner reads me as ambient organic. Traces of synthetic protein, heat signature in the human range, no neural spike. I register as furniture. And the separatists? Older hardware, less sensitive." A pause. "More dangerous, actually. The older systems don't filter. They flag anything that moves in the thermal range and let the soldiers decide. Which means I'd need to be with a human or behind a structure at each approach." "So you can get us through the hegemony side invisibly," Lena said slowly. "The separatist approach still needs cover." "I can create cover," Soma said. "How?" She looked at Lena steadily. "I need you to trust me." There was a silence in the room. She was watching Soma with the expression Lana recognized from 13 assessments, the face people made when they were deciding whether to hand something valuable to someone they didn't fully understand. Lena thought about the scar along Soma's jaw, about the unfinished spine frame in Dr. Arun's hangar, about the name Soma had been given and then quietly outgrown. "All right," Lena said. "Tell me the plan." The plan was strange. Most plans in Lena's experience were built around what soldiers could do. This plan was built around what Soma was, which was something the Veth had never encountered, something they didn't have a category for, and something that lived exactly in the seam between what the two factions expected of each other. The separatists had established a forward sentry post at Junction 4 South, 2 soldiers rotating in 4-hour shifts, watching the corridor toward the hegemony positions. They were watching for hegemony units. They were watching for human combatants. They were not watching for a woman who walked down the middle of the corridor at an unhurried pace, carrying a hegemony-marked signal pack, with the calm and slightly distracted demeanor of someone delivering equipment that needed to be somewhere else. Soma had taken the signal pack from a hegemony supply cache they'd passed in Ring 3. Lena's team had disabled a patrol unit and spent 9 tense minutes pulling equipment. Soma had selected the signal pack with the precision of someone who knew exactly what she was looking for. She'd shown Lena the markings. A hegemony logistics tag, automatically recognized by separatist sensors as non-threatening supply traffic. "They'll still see me," Soma had said. "You want them to see you. I want them to see exactly what I choose to show them." And she had walked out into the corridor, and the 2 separatist sentries had turned, and there had been 3 seconds during which everything in the universe had balanced on an edge. And Soma had not broken stride, had not adjusted her pace or her expression, had nodded once, with the politely absent acknowledgement of someone passing through, who had no time for conversation, and definitely nothing worth stopping for. And she had walked past them and into the junction, and Lena's whole unit had exhaled at once. "How?" Desh said softly. She learned. Lena said, from watching. She spent 4 months in that hangar, learning how people move when they don't want to be noticed. People? Yeah. Was Veth people? Lena said. Veth humans, any creature that lives in social hierarchies. If you look like you belong, like you have somewhere to be that is more important than the conversation someone is trying to start, like stopping you would create more paperwork than it solves. They let you through. Desh thought about that. That's terrifying. That's Soma. They reached the Ring 4 primary junction at the 29-minute mark, which left them 18 minutes before the sensor sweep and enough time barely to establish the relay splice that was the whole point of being here. The junction was a wide, hexagonal chamber that served as the crossroads between 3 of the station's central corridors. It smelled of scorched metal and something biological that Lena didn't want to identify. There were 2 hegemony sensor emitters on the upper wall, swept and disabled by Soma in 40 seconds flat, working with tools she carried in a concealed forearm cavity, with the casual efficiency of someone retrieving a pen. Lena's engineers had the relay splice open within 6 minutes. The splice itself would take 14. They were already behind. We'll need more time, said Specialist Ito, not looking up from the relay housing. You have 13 minutes, Lena said. I need 17. 13, Sergeant. We'll make 13 work, Soma said quietly. She was at the junction's northern corridor entrance, looking down the long approach toward the hegemony-held rings. Head was tilted very slightly, listening to something none of them could hear. There's a triad coming, she said. They're not on patrol schedule. Something triggered them, maybe the disabled emitters, maybe movement on a secondary sensor I missed. How long? 6 minutes. 7 if they're cautious. They won't be cautious. Can we move the splice point? No, Ito said. This is the only accessible node in this ring. Soma turned from the corridor. She looked at Lena with an expression Lena had not seen on her face before. Something measured and quiet, and slightly sad, in the way of someone who has arrived at a decision they'd hoped to avoid. I can stop them, Soma said, not with force. I'd lose a direct engagement against a triad. Wrong numbers, wrong position. She paused. But I can delay them by being exactly what they aren't expecting. A short breath that wasn't quite a sigh. When the hegemony primary advance encounters an unclassified entity in contested space, protocol requires them to halt, assess, and attempt communication before engaging. It's in their doctrine. They're methodical. They document. They're required to document anything that doesn't match their threat categorization. She looked down at herself, at the hands, the jacket, the human shape of the thing she was. They've never encountered me before. The Veth have encountered humans for 30 years. They have human categorized down to the bone, thermal profile, movement signature, neural output, defensive posture. But they haven't categorized me. I'm not in the database. Something almost gentle in her voice. I'm new. Lena felt the cold understanding settle in. You're going to make them stop and stare. I'm going to make them stop and argue about what they're looking at. Hegemony triad units, individual ranking. The senior soldier's assessment overrides the others, but the assessment protocol requires all 3 to file separately before engagement clearance is issued. If I give them something to assess, something that reads human but wrong, something that activates their documentation instinct before their threat instinct. How long? If I'm doing my job, 8 minutes. You said they'll be here in 6. I'll meet them in the corridor. I'll have 2 minutes of approach time to read them and calibrate. She met Lena's eyes. I need your engineers to finish in 13 minutes. They said 17. Then, they'll need to find 4 minutes, Soma said, and there was something in her voice that wasn't a request. He said, without looking up, I heard that. I'll find the 4 minutes. Lena looked at Soma for a long moment, at the jaw scar, the 2 still eyes, the face that had learned warmth from watching humans be warm. Come back, she said. That's my intention, Soma said. It's always been my intention. She walked into the corridor alone. The Veth hegemony triad came around the bend at 6 minutes exactly, and they were not cautious. 3 soldiers moving in the tight overlapping formation that Veth used in enclosed spaces. Weapons at the ready position but not raised. Sensor filaments extended from their shoulder rigs, sweeping. They stopped when they saw her. This was the moment Soma had been building toward. Across 4 months of watching humans move in that hangar, watching how a person stood when they wanted to communicate harmlessness, watching how Dr. Arun's hands changed when he was explaining something he cared about. Open, turned slightly upward, an instinct as old as fire. She stood very still in the center of the corridor, arms loose at her sides, head tilted 2 degrees, the angle of polite attention. She was not displaying threat postures. She was not displaying flight postures. She was displaying something the Veth had never encountered in a human before. Because humans, in their experience, didn't stand in undefended corridors and watch advancing Veth soldiers with the calm, interested expression of someone who had been expecting them and had something to say. The senior soldier's sensor filament swept over her twice. She could feel the scanner touch, a faint resonance in her secondary hull sensors, and she knew what it was returning. Normal, human range. Acoustic, respiratory and cardiac simulations steady. Chemical, synthetic protein traces, organic compounds within human parameters. Neural, ambient, uncategorized. The senior soldier said something to the others. Soma processed the Veth dialect. She had been studying recorded intercepts for 2 months. Not to speak it. She couldn't speak it, but to understand the rhythms, the cadences, the specific sound patterns that corresponded to uncertainty. She heard uncertainty now. She heard the sound of a soldier who had encountered something that was not in the ledger and was buying time to write a new entry. She tilted her head the other direction, 2 degrees. An invitation. The second soldier spoke, an argument. Third spoke, another argument. The senior soldier raised a hand. Quiet, I'm thinking, and stepped forward 3 paces, which was both aggressive and profoundly useful, because a soldier moving closer to examine a thing was a soldier who had, however briefly, chosen documentation over destruction. 8 meters of corridor between them. Soma waited. She thought about Dr. Arun's hands on the spine frame in the hangar. The careful way he had laid each neural filament, not because the procedure required care, but because he was making something he intended to love. She thought about the name she had been given and grown into, and then grown out of. And the name she had chosen instead, not a human name, just the shape of what she was, a sound that felt like her own architecture. She thought about Somporn, unfinished, waiting in the frame, the sister who didn't exist yet, and whether she ever would. She thought about the beauty contest, which was not a thing that had ever actually happened, but which Dr. Arun had described once, in the middle of a long diagnostic session, as something he'd imagined. 2 robots walking out onto a stage and being assessed by judges who were trying to determine which of them was more convincingly human, and the punchline was that the judges couldn't tell. And the further punchline was that Soma had pointed out, the punchline didn't land the way he thought it did, because the contest wasn't about which robot was more human, it was about which robot most wanted to be seen. She had thought about that a lot. The senior soldier was 5 meters away now. The sensor filament extended fully. She could hear, very faintly, the mechanical sound of assessment hardware cycling through categorization protocols. Soma made a small gesture. Just the hands, open, turned slightly upward, the oldest language there was. The senior soldier stopped. The 3 Veth stood in the corridor and looked at her. She looked back. 4 minutes and 27 seconds. She counted everyone. She was the most interesting thing they had ever seen. The relay splice completed at minute 12:50 seconds. Soma heard Ito's voice in her earpiece. Done. We're done. Go. And she allowed herself exactly 1 second of relief, the way she had learned to allow emotions their moment and then return them to calibration. And then she stepped backward 1 pace, and the senior Veth soldier's sensor filament retracted, and something in the quality of the silence changed. She turned and walked away from them. Same pace as the separatist corridor, unhurried, directed, the walk of someone with somewhere to be. She heard the soldiers behind her, heard the cadence of another argument, heard the senior soldier's sharp syllable of restraint. She made the junction entrance at a walk and broke into a run the moment the corner took her out of sight. They extracted at 44 minutes, 7 seconds into the sensor window. The relay splice was active. Comm nodes were online. Somewhere in 6 inhabited systems the string lit up again. In Ring 2's ops room, Lena sat on an equipment crate and said nothing for a while. Soma sat beside her, running a self-diagnostic, her gaze on the viewport, where the station's exterior hung dark and cold against the stars. "You're all right," Lena said. It wasn't a question. Hull sensors took some resonance from the close-range scanner. Tolerance a pause. "I've had worse from the assessment battery." Lena almost smiled. "Teen assessments. 14 now." Soma glanced sideways. "File a report." "I will, and then someone new will come to assess me. Probably." Lena looked at Soma's profile, the deliberate jaw, the synthetic skin, the scar she would never ask Arun to fix. "How'd you feel out there?" In the corridor. Soma was quiet for a long moment. "I'm not supposed to feel things," she said finally. "That's not what the architecture is designed for." "I know. Did you feel?" Another silence. Somewhere in Soma's processing architecture, the question was being considered with the same care Dr. Arun had used on the neural filaments, handled gently, without rushing, because rushing would bend something that was supposed to stay straight. "I felt like something that was new," Soma said. "I felt like something they didn't have a word for. And I thought," she paused, "I thought that might be the most useful thing I am. The strength. Not the scanner resistance. Not the protocols I know. The fact that they stopped. The fact that for 4 minutes and 27 seconds, 3 soldiers whose entire doctrine is built around categorization could not categorize me. And they stopped instead of firing, because the thing in front of them was new, and newness. Even for the Veth. Even for any creature that builds systems and doctrines and wars, newness makes you hesitate." She turned to look at Lena. "Humans are new," she said. "In the long account of things, humans are the newest thing out here. And the Veth can't categorize something that keeps changing. They're methodical. We." A slight pause, and Lena heard the weight in that pronoun. The way Soma had claimed it, the way she'd earned it. "We aren't." 3 weeks later, Lena filed her report. She marked Soma 422R as fully cleared for active deployment, wrote 6 pages on the Ring 4 operation, and attached a personal note that the chain of command would likely ignore, addressed to nobody in particular. That said, "The question of what she is has been settled to my satisfaction. The more interesting question is what she is becoming." She sent a copy to Dr. Arun. He replied with a single sentence. "Somporn's neural matrix completed first integration today. She should be ambulatory within the month." Lena stared at that for a while. Then she forwarded it to Soma. Soma's reply came 40 minutes later, which was, for a synthetic mind that could process at speeds no human neurology matched, an eternity. Reply was 3 words. It said, "Tell me more." The Veth came back to Cressa Station 4 months after that, which everyone had expected, because the Veth were methodical and methodical things, returned to unfinished business. They came with a larger force this time. Not a forward element, not a dual-faction reconnaissance, but a full hegemony fleet group, with breach units, and the kind of patience that had ground down harder targets than a relay station. They also sent a Herald unit. That was the thing nobody had expected. The Herald unit was a Veth soldier in non-combat configuration, carrying a diplomatic frequency transmitter, requesting a meeting. Hegemony Doctrine never requested meetings. Hegemony Doctrine arrived and began removing things. The request for a meeting, routed through the relay nodes that Soma had bought 13 minutes to save, through the comm string that reached 6 systems, caused an moment of silence in the command operations room in the outer theater. Someone at command who had been in the service for 30 years said he had never seen that before. The content of the meeting request was brief. It said, "We have encountered an unclassified entity in human-held space. Our doctrine requires clarification before engagement proceeds. We request clarification." Lena read the translation twice. She sent it to Soma. Soma's reply came in seconds. It said, "I told you. The negotiations took 11 days. Lena was not in the room for most of them. She was a sergeant, and negotiations happened several grades above sergeant. She heard the shape of them from people who had been there, and later from the diplomatic transcripts, and later still from Soma herself, who had been in the room, because the thing they were negotiating about was her. What the Veth hegemony wanted was an answer. They had encountered something that moved in the human thermal range, carried no weaponry, displayed no threat posturing, and had neutralized a triad's engagement clearance for nearly 5 minutes through the mechanism of being categorically new. Their doctrine had no slot for it. Their doctrine, built across 300 years of military contact with species, including humans, had never encountered a thing that was both and neither, that had the shape of a human and the interior of a machine, and the behavior of something that had learned what it wanted from watching both, and chosen for itself what to keep. They wanted to know, was it a weapon? Soma sat at the table on the human side for 11 days. She answered every question they asked with the same unhurried patience she had shown in that corridor. Not the patience of someone waiting for something to end, but the patience of someone who understood that this moment mattered and intended to be present for all of it. She answered their questions and she asked her own. And on the 9th day, a hegemony senior diplomat, a creature of old wars and long doctrines, looked at her for a long time and asked a question that was not in the formal agenda. Question was, what are you? Soma thought about Dr. Arun's hands on the neural filaments, about the name she had grown out of and the name she had chosen, about Somporn ambulatory now, learning to watch the rain, about 4 minutes and 27 seconds in a corridor, and the way newness made even the methodical pause. She said, I am new. I am the newest thing you have met. And I think you should get used to that, because where I came from, there are more of us coming, and we are all going to be new in ways you have not cataloged yet. And the question you should be asking is not what we are, but what we are becoming. And neither of us knows the answer to that yet, which means you have a choice about whether that uncertainty is a reason to destroy or a reason to wait and see. The senior diplomat was silent for a long time. Then, he said something to his translator, who rendered it into standard as, that is not a satisfying answer. And Soma said, no, but it's a true one, and I've found those tend to last longer. The engagement pause held for 31 days, which in this war was something close to a miracle. Lena used those 31 days to rotate her unit through recovery, to file 3 more reports that command acknowledged with form letters, and to stand in Dr. Arun's hangar on a cold morning and watch Somporn take her first unassisted steps across the floor. Somporn was smaller than Soma. Younger in the way that machines could be young, less worn, less tested. Her expressions still finding their vocabulary, her head turning toward sounds a fraction too late. She had no scar on her jaw. She would, Lena thought, eventually. Soma stood near the wall and watched her sister move, and her expression was the most unguarded thing Lena had ever seen on a synthetic face. Something open and tentative and enormous. The face of something encountering, for the first time, a thing it had not expected to want. How does she feel? Lena asked. Soma said, I don't know yet. We're just starting. Dr. Arun said nothing. He was watching both of them, with the hands of a man who had made something he intended to love, and had found, somehow, that it had come true twice. Outside the hangar, the war continued in the methodical Veth way, patient, systematic, unhurried. Somewhere in the outer theater, command was receiving signals through a relay string that still worked because of 13 minutes in a corridor. Somewhere in the hegemony, a senior diplomat was filing a categorization request for an entity that didn't fit the existing database and would need a new entry. And in the hangar, Somporn reached the far wall, turned, and looked at Soma the way people look at the only thing in the room they already recognize. Soma looked back. She did the thing with her hands, open, turned upward, the oldest language there was. Somporn tilted her head 2 degrees, an answer. Something in that hangar, in the cold and the grease and the faint copper smell that never fully went away, something shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, not with the weight of great events. Just 2 new things, recognizing each other, in a universe that had not made room for them yet, getting ready to make room anyway.